afternoon. It's Monday, the 27th of February 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Now, we had some internet problems this morning, which is why I do apologise, Vanessa, your lower third was incorrect. This is not Brian Garrett. So we had internet problems this morning, which delayed us a little bit.
Should I start with the weather then?
If we do get cut off for any reason, it's beyond our control. We're going to keep going with the news, and the archive will go out as usual in due course. But of course, where are we going to start today? With the White Helmets, which have been awarded an Academy Award, Best Documentary Short from Netflix. They produced the documentary, and we have titled this Best Documentary Short, Al-Qaeda.
Well, there's no other way to entitle it, really. Terrorism gets given the red carpet treatment in Hollywood, which I think demonstrates very clearly who we are dealing with. In fact, one positive that comes out of this, Mike, is that it's fully exposed the elite cartel, which is fundamentally Zionism, along with Saudi extremist ideology, funded, of course, by UK and US deep state, supported by the illegal state of Israel, supported by Turkey and various other nations in the region, with the intent to whitewash the terrorist atrocities that are being committed on a daily basis inside Syria, and facilitated and participated in by this organization that has just been given one of the highest accolades that can be given in the film industry. Perhaps also for that reason, it's also very fitting, as they are effectively some of the best actors around at the moment.
Well, let's just remind ourselves about what it is the White Helmets actually do in Syria. This is not what they are purported to do. And we'll start off with a little video that you've put together from your most recent trip to Syria, where you were speaking to people from Eastern Aleppo, and they were giving some witness testimony about what the White Helmets were up to. And
one very important point here, Mike, is that these voices are consistently erased and disappeared from Western public perception by the corporate media, by the NGOs, by the UN, by our what I consider to be criminal regimes, and by the so-called anti-war organizations who are effectively campaigning for regime change and destabilization inside Syria. So these are the voices that are never heard.
Okay.
أو مسعفين يجوا لهون يساعدوا الناس.
لا ما يساعدوا الناس، بس يشيلوا الجرحى، يشيلوا
ولا بس كان يساعد دفاع مدني. كان في دفاع مدني ساعد. No, there is no not.
بشوفوا الوقت اللي بيصير مثل ما قلت لكم عسكريين بيجوا بيشيلوا ركام شغلات الجرحى يطلعون من هذا ويكون في تحت المسلحين، يعني المسلح بالدرجة الأولى. المدني
armed groups the first priority.
But did they help civilians?
بس المسلحين أكثر.
And what were the hospitals being used for? And were the terrorists preventing them from leaving?
Yes.
How?
They used to shoot at us. And the one who killed those families are from Nusra Front.
في لهم كان صار موجودين يشتغلوا معهم، يشتغلوا احيانا مع المدنيين، يشتغلوا غالبا كان للمصالحة. الحقيقة استنى الوضع كانت هي جبهة.
But the allegations got more serious. This man accused the organization of intentionally killing his little girl.
I took her to the civil defense hospital and they gave her an injection filled with air to kill her.
You ever see in Fardous men with white helmets, they're called the white helmets of the civil defense, helping people when they were injured?
When they came to help the injured, they stole from them. If people were wearing jewelry, they cut it off. All of them are thieves.
And were they treating any civilians?
في كان مستوصفات يروحوا عليهم بس ما هي معالجة، يعني معالجة كنا
There were
أنا
some.
لحد الآن إيدي مصوبة ليك ما سلمت يعني.
So very little help apparently from the white helmets for people who were anything other than terrorists.
Oh, absolutely none. And in fact, as you heard with some of those testimonies, effectively they left people to die under the rubble. In one instance, we were told, or Lizzie Phelan of RT was told, that they had killed a young girl that had been brought in for treatment with the injection that they'd given her. And you know, we see countless evidence of their participation in various atrocities, both against civilians, but also against prisoners of war, against Syrian Arab Army soldiers, which obviously contravenes the Geneva Convention and the rules of war.
Okay, so well, the Foreign Office were offering their congratulations to the White Helmets documentary for its Oscars win, and the image that they have there with the White Helmets label on it. Somebody apparently under the rubble. Now, you've mentioned, we've mentioned this before, but I remember one or two really pretty disturbing video clips appearing where White Helmets were appearing to taunt people that were trapped under the rubble, and in fact suggesting that, well, it's going to take you weeks to die and it's going to be really unpleasant and this kind of stuff. That's not the behavior of somebody that's supposedly a civil defense worker.
Well, and also, Mike, I mean, if we look at many of these ostensible, you know, apparent rescue videos, they are peculiar in the sense that we always see children being rescued. We often see them being rescued from areas that it looks as if it's perfectly possible for that child to climb out on its own. And the child is often exited perfectly clean, clutching various toys, dolls, teddy bears that are also perfectly clean. And so it does cast aspersions as to the credibility of these videos. And again, we come back to the use, the exploitation of children as propaganda to promote war that will kill more Syrian children.
Well, look, you created this graphic for 21st Century Wire and White Helmet carrying a child there. What we wanted to talk about at this point was some of the videos showing the so-called medical treatment that children are getting. And frankly, what I've seen is too disturbing to put on this live stream, and I wouldn't be comfortable with it. So really unpleasant stuff.
Yeah. And actually, I posted a statement about that this morning because, like you, Mike, we've both watched the videos that we're talking about that actually, I believe, were the videos that were used at the UN last year, March 2016, to supposedly depict a Syrian government chemical attack and reduced the UN delegates to tears. Now, this video, which I believe is the same video because, of course, it's been wiped from existence on the net by the UN. It's actually been removed from the majority of the articles regarding this incident. Apart from, of course, a Channel 4 program on the incident that is still available on the net and has definitely used this footage as part of their report. Now, in this footage, and Channel 4 yet again have edited out this particular segment, we see a child of about 1 year old basically being stabbed in the chest with about a 5-inch hypodermic needle by what is supposedly a White Helmet operative. It's certainly a White Helmet piece of footage with the White Helmet logo in the top left-hand corner. The needle is then moved around in a fashion which is absolutely horrifying to watch. And in fact, a number of doctors who have watched this video have said to us, the fact that there is no blood circulating, in other words, with an action as violent as this, there would normally have been blood seen or exiting from the wound. There is none, which suggests that there's no circulation of blood. It suggests that the child is possibly already dead. They also stated that there was no medical procedure that resembles what these so-called paramedics or doctors are doing to this child. And also that putting the needle in with this amount of violence and basically rotating it wildly in a 1-year-old child's chest is going to lead to laceration of tissue, of the heart and the lungs. So if this child were not already dead, it is very probable that that action in itself would have killed that child or certainly grievously harmed it. This is the organization that is being given the Oscars, being given the celebrity treatment by all our governments, purely because they are funding it to perpetuate what is going to be further child abuse inside Syria.
I mean, do you think that it would be an extreme statement to suggest that what they are producing are snuff movies?
It's an extreme statement, but we're dealing with extreme people. We're dealing with extremists, drugged to the eyeballs. We know that there's considerable evidence of the fact that Captagon has been infiltrated into Syria to the terrorist organizations and quite likely to the White Helmet organization itself, which is clearly affiliated to the various terrorist and extremist groups inside Syria. And we know that basically what that does is it inhibits the adrenaline inhibitor. So in other words, the adrenaline keeps going and keeps rising. And this has a terrifying effect upon human beings.
Well, let's run through a couple more images then. This is from the White Helmets. I mean, I think the caption is not from their website, but the image is from their website. And of course, this was when we were being told that so many people were starving to death in eastern Aleppo, but clearly these guys not having any trouble.
I mean, what is astounding is the arrogance of this group, the belief in their invincibility against any sort of destruction of the propaganda that is protecting them. This photograph was taken at the end of October by Ismail al-Abdullah, who's the white helmet in the center there. And literally only about 2 weeks after this, Raed Saleh, who is the president of the White Helmets, put out a statement saying that civilians in Aleppo were within 10 days of complete starvation. You know, I mean, I'm actually speechless over this, because when you see these creatures stuffing their faces, basically, while genuinely Syrian civilians that I saw in East Aleppo after liberation came out and were starving. Why? Because the White Helmets and the affiliated extremist groups had stockpiled food in East Aleppo and had starved the civilians that they were using for propaganda and as human shields. Many of the testimonies testified to the fact that there was enough food in Aleppo for 1 year, but the civilians had no access to it. But obviously, the White Helmets did.
And they also had access to plenty of prisoners and lots of evidence of them taking part in executions.
Yeah. I mean, this was, I can't remember exactly which date this was, but it was in 2016, I believe. And the guy in the foreground taking the selfie is Miwaya Aga Hassan, who basically not only, obviously, was present during the humiliation, torture, and eventual execution of these 2 prisoners of war who were captured in Khan Tuman, close to Aleppo, who were brutally, publicly executed. And he then posted the video of that execution onto his Facebook page with celebratory comments.
Okay, and let's just remind ourselves of the way that they treat the dead, because of course they're there to save life apparently, and they say that when they want to save someone's life, they don't care if it's an enemy or a friend. What concerns them is that the soul might die. But we have a White Helmet here saying that they collect the bodies and throw them in the trash, so they're not given any respect. But let's talk about Scott Bennett. Now, he is ex-US Special Forces, became a whistleblower on US terrorist financing, and he issued a statement today saying CIA orders the Academy Awards to give the White Helmet's Best Documentary Award. Seems propaganda is now officially Hollywood identity. The White Helmets are a CIA MI6-funded propaganda arm of Arab mercenaries pretending to be human rights hospital aid workers, but in reality are designed to influence Western audiences with false videos and staged events depicting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad as an enemy of Western civilization. Nothing could be further from the truth. So that is pretty definitive.
Yeah, and another very clear point to make, Mike, was that on the 9th of October 2016, so a fair way back, and this has never ever been picked up or mentioned either by Netflix, by the White Helmets, or by the the corporate media promoters of the White Helmets. But this was actually a statement put out by the Threshold Foundation, who were actually funding the White Helmet documentary via their high impact documentary Circle. And they withdrew funding on the 9th of October 2016, and I'll read to you why they did withdraw that funding. We have since learned that the subject of the film, the White Helmets organization, and others involved in this film are advocating for strategies that could entail international military force and escalated violence. Given that military force and violent strategies do not align with Threshold's values, we state that while we support the work of the filmmakers, we do not support militaristic responses. So even taking out the fact that this group has deliberately participated in terrorist atrocities, has affiliated itself with extremist organizations, the point that Threshold make is also very clear, that they have consistently propagandized escalation of military conflict inside Syria between the United States and Russia on Syrian soil. And yet, this organization, which is perpetuating conflict in the region, destabilizing Syria, attacking a sovereign nation, is being made a celebrity icon by our media and promotional organizations.
Now, not every Hollywood figure is standing with the Oscars on this. Carla Ortiz, who I believe was in Syria while you were there.
Yeah, she was. She was in Aleppo actually at the same time as I was, but somehow we missed each other.
She is speaking out very bravely, and of course she boycotted the Oscar ceremony last night. And of course we should also mention somebody else who has also been to Syria and is also speaking out, and that's Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Two brave women,
but I think also what is very important, and an important point to make here, is those who, the propaganda cartel that is iconizing the White Helmets is equally demonizing all those who stand against intervention in Syria, including Tulsi Gabbard, including President Trump. And so we see a very clear correlation between the White Helmets and the globalist agenda in the world and the demonization of those who are daring to take a stand. So people like Carla Ortiz and Tulsi Gabbard, who are really risking their careers to stand in their truth and to defend the truth inside Syria that they have seen, they have witnessed with their own eyes. Hats off to them.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to end this section with this one. This is Financial Times tweeting out today. It's Oscars time. Will disruptors like Amazon and Netflix reshape the entire film industry? They certainly have they could be in the position to do that. I think they have the ability to do that if they wish to. But Netflix, frankly, if they continue to push out this type of thing, if Netflix join the bandwagon of simply being a propaganda mouthpiece for governments, for the Western governments, then they neither deserve nor will they reshape the film industry. They'll not disrupt that industry because people will very quickly become cynical to their sort of newness and their freshness. But I think the key point here is that what's required at this point is individual acts, and the first individual act that anybody can take in these situations is to withdraw finance from organizations you disagree with.
Yeah.
Netflix has clearly come out and aligned itself with Al-Qaeda, as we have said, in our opinion. The simple thing to do at this point is to stop funding them.
Yeah, and I think also a very important point again is that we need to stop living vicariously through the courage of those very few individuals that are taking a stand, both publicly and privately. Because basically anybody who is celebrating this award of an Oscar to what is fundamentally Al-Qaeda committing atrocities against the Syrian people is celebrating those atrocities. It's celebrating the use of children for war porn to promote more conflict, to kill more children in Syria. It's supporting and celebrating the rape of Syrian women, the massacre of whole entire families, the ethnic cleansing of minorities, the kidnapping and abuse of children and selling of them into paedophile rings, drug trafficking, prostitution. It is basically celebrating every evil that has been created by our regimes. And we can no longer sit back and pretend that it's just happening somewhere else and we don't have a right and an obligation to take a stand against it. It's time to stand up and be counted. It's time to stop sitting on the fence about Syria, but not only Syria, about Yemen, about Libya, about Iraq, about Ukraine, about every country that is being infested by this terrorist plague that has been created by our regimes. We are responsible for that, and we need to start taking that responsibility and to actually express that outrage, whether if it's at a party where people are celebrating the Oscars and the white helmets getting it, speak out. Because until your voices are heard, this is going to continue. And these children in particular in Syria, these orphans, are going to continue suffering. We are responsible for them. And that same plague is not that far off at being on our doorstep. So we need to start taking the stand right now.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to this then, because a couple of weeks ago, Robert Stewart, Patrick Henningsen and I produced an episode of Insight on the 2013 BBC documentary Saving Syria's Children. Well, you've got it on the screen there. I'm sure you recognize it. This is a little bit of footage from that documentary. Everybody will remember that. It came out just after, immediately after, in fact, the shorter report was put on the BBC News literally within minutes of the vote in 2013, which was lost by the government over whether we would bomb Syria or not. Well, Victor Lewis Smith, who is a British film, television, radio producer, has been and has produced material for the BBC in the past, comedy material and so on. He's a long-standing contributor to Private Eye magazine. He saw Insight and he watched it twice. Then he challenged the BBC on this and he said, basically, will somebody at Panorama contact him about the possible fake Syria program that they made, or he will terminate his BBC contract. And so there have been a number of, he hasn't been quiet about this, a number of tweets about what's going on. This is typical of what he's been pushing out. He will terminate his contract by tweeting to BBC. If the Panorama editor fails to contact him, it's up to them. Now, what apparently had been planned was that there would be a telephone call today about this, but they are not. He had no information about this. He knew that there was going to be a call, didn't know the time, didn't know the details. But at the bottom there, he's saying ripping up a contract must seem faintly ridiculous, that yet the negotiations were long and the fee substantial. So again, we've got an individual making a stand on something important. He said, it isn't a stand. I just had a sniffy suspicion not to take money from certain people, and I need evidence. And he said, he's had nothing from the Panorama editor after a fulsome email. She may have been scuppered by the legals above. Well, perhaps his latest tweet today gives an indication that that's exactly what happened, because he said that the editor of Panorama has now written to him that she's going to put her response in writing to him, which perhaps implies that the legal department has got involved. And he said, well, how about making the unedited rushes available? And this is a very important point. Yes. This is something that the BBC have consistently refused to do.
Well, and I think also, sorry to interrupt, but I think also that is a challenge that should be put out to the White Helmet, to the producers of the White Helmet documentary, and to Channel 4 and to the BBC. All of their propaganda material that has effectively perpetuated the war against Syria should be made available in unedited form.
Right. Okay. Well, that's right. Robert Stewart himself had attempted to get the BBC to provide some unedited material because, of course, there was one of the issues was the fact that nobody seemed to be able to agree as to what time this attack apparently happened, and so he had challenged the BBC on this. And the response that he got from the BBC was that the committee noted that the complainant had raised a number of additional matters that could not have been fully assessed without substantial further investigation. It had in mind, in particular, suggestions that an unnamed former commander from the Free Syrian Army had denied the incident took place, that a Dutch woman had perpetrated in this, that a Dutch woman had participated in the scenes as an actress, that the metadata from the panorama team's footage should be analysed to resolve discrepancies in the reported time of the bombing. The committee also noted a few other things, but basically what it boiled down to was that they said that it would be just too expensive to analyse the metadata from the footage to try to get some kind of idea of why there was a discrepancy in the timings. And really, it's going to be very interesting to see what the BBC comes back with, because, is it going to be anything other than, well, a denial? They can't really do anything else. They're not going to put the, Robert's been campaigning on this for years. They're not going to put the evidence on the table, even under the pressure they're under at the moment.
But I think their avoidance of dealing with the situation speaks volumes in itself. You know, if you have nothing to hide, there is no problem about discussing any situation or any program with anybody that is querying it. But they have consistently, again, avoided any discussion on it.
Yes. Right. Well, if you're of a weak disposition, probably best to turn the volume down.
Hi folks, I'm Boris Johnson, I'm the Foreign Secretary, and I'm here on the banks of the Nile in Cairo because, although you may not believe this, Britain is the #1 investor in Egypt. So we are working with Egyptian government and politicians, with Egyptian civil society, and of course with Egyptian businesses to help promote the long-term stability and prosperity of this country. Because it's not only vital for Egyptians, but also, of course, vital for our interests as well.
So there we go. Boris is in Egypt today. What did he have to say? Well, you've seen what he said, but what is he doing there? This is more soft power projection into Egypt. Is he really going to be doing the Egyptian? Is he going to be promoting stability in Egypt, Vanessa?
Well, I think any UK regime claims of promoting stability in a region where they've had a post-colonial strategy of destabilization for at least a century is to be ridiculed. I mean, since the 1915-16 Sykes-Picot redrawing of the borders was set in motion, they've been instrumental in installing puppet regimes in the region, in promoting terrorism in the region. I mean, their romance with two of the greatest despotic, elitist, extremist states in the region, Israel and Saudi Arabia, leaves not a great deal to the imagination as regards their efforts to destabilize the region. And we've seen those efforts coming to bear upon Egypt for some time now. The relationship between Egypt and the UK historically has been one of colonial destabilization. So no, it's to be entirely ridiculed.
Okay, well, just before we move on to other subjects, just a reminder that on the 30th of March, Gilad Atzmon is the guest of David Scott in Glasgow in the West Courtyard, West on the Green, Templeton Building in Glasgow. Tickets are available on Eventbrite. They're £7 and £10 on the door. Please get along to that if you can. Now let's just briefly discuss mainstream news coverage. This is Professor Piers Robinson, and he is saying Western mainstream news media coverage of the war in Syria needs a full investigation. I do suggest you go and read this this posting that he's made on the CFOM website, Propaganda Here and Now. You know Professor Robinson?
Yeah, I mean, he did a great interview with RT's, Russia Today's Going Underground on the Amnesty International latest human slaughterhouse report on Sadnaya prison in Syria near Damascus. So I would thoroughly recommend people to follow Piers Robinson, to read his reports, particularly on the propaganda war that is being waged against Syria.
Well, now, of course, something that we are all very well aware of is that NATO is not expanding eastwards and not putting any pressure on Russia's borders. Isn't that right?
Oh, yes.
Right. Well, let's just provide the evidence. Because here is a short video from Right, so there you go, Vanessa. We don't need to worry because NATO's activities in the Baltic states and in Poland are purely defensive. They're purely proportionate, and they're only there because of Russian aggression.
So they're just going to give cookies to all of the Russian soldiers on the borders.
Yes.
Right?
So, well, UK armed forces are in Estonia. They've taken part in celebrations to mark the country's Independence Day. And this is ahead of the deployment of British troops to lead part of NATO's enhanced forward presence in Estonia. That's what that short video was about. And an advanced team from 5th Battalion Rifles is already in the country. Now, of course, they're also in Poland, where I believe they are causing all kinds of road accidents and all kinds of problems with the civilian population. And although the Polish government seem to appreciate their presence, I think some others in Poland don't. Michael Fallon said that today's landmark in Estonia's history is an opportunity to celebrate our defence ties that stretch back over a century to when they gained independence. Britain is playing a leading role in European security by deploying forces in Estonia alongside our allies to defend NATO. Because, of course, an attack on one is attack on all. That's what they're really saying. So there you go. We don't need to worry because it's not about NATO expansion. It's merely a proportionate defensive move against Russian aggression.
All right. And have they detailed the Russian aggression?
No.
Right.
No. Right. Completely different subject. This is an article in the Times today from George Osborne and Michael Bloomberg. And it's all about cities. And they're saying voters in communities across the UK, US and Europe have been expressing frustration with globalisation. Although wage stagnation and the loss of manufacturing jobs have more to do with automation at home than trade abroad, people are feeling disempowered by global forces beyond their control and alienated from democratic political systems which have been slow to respond. Yet thus far, the populist leaders exploiting their anxiety have offered only a false promise that in retreating behind our borders, we can recover a past that is gone forever, if it ever really existed. We see it differently. We believe that free trade, new technology, and open democracy have delivered increases in living standards and opportunities unimaginable to our forebears. But we also recognise that over the past couple of decades, governments have done too little to address legitimate concerns that come with these changes and that have now reached a critical mass. But rather than seek refuge in nationalism and isolationism, we believe that a better response to globalisation lies in localisation, or as the Tories prefer to call it, localism. Mayors and city councils understand their communities better than national administrators. They are also more accountable to them, which often leads them to be more pragmatic and less ideological, focused on solving problems rather than conducting debates. And they go on to say that, in other words, by joining forces, the whole of a region can be bigger than its parts and also more effective at persuading central government to support their interests. To make this happen most effectively, these cities need directly elected mayors too. The two of us have worked together on a variety of issues over these years, and now we're launching a new plan to support the Northern Powerhouse, including its newly elected mayors. Now look, this is not just a national issue. This is not just part of devolution, something small. This is actually a global agenda. It's being pushed through organizations like C40 Cities. It is absolutely global. They're using global warming or climate change as an excuse to push forward with this agenda. This is about the breakup of sovereign nation states. And it's about putting power, you might say, at a local level, but it's centralized control at a local level. Now, if you want to understand a bit more of what's going on here, we strongly recommend that you read some articles on the UK Column website. The Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate is one. And part two of that is Distraction Politics and the Long March to Global Government. That's another one that's important. There's an entire article series, The Common Purpose Effect. Please read them. And also One World Governance series of articles. One there, Abusing the System Through NGOs and CSOs. This is stuff that we've been talking about for 5-6 years. And why is it important? Well, it's important if you understand this quote from David Blunkett. We need a different relationship between government and governed, between people and elected representatives, and between civil society and formal politics. And what he's talking about is a change in the relationship between the individual and the state, where we no longer live, we've been talking about this so often now, we no longer live in a representative democracy, if we have done, certainly not in recent decades. We now live in what they're describing as a participatory democracy, but as we've said many times, individuals don't get to participate. It's only NGOs, civil society organizations, vested interests, corporate interests, foundations, trusts, they get to participate. They get to set the policy in their interests, not in the interests of the individual. And, we have said many times when the charity sector, the third sector in the UK is worth 40-50 billion pounds a year, when there's all this charity going on in the UK, when there's all this international aid money going to Syria and Libya and all these other countries, why is anybody in any difficulty?
But I think also, again, this comes back to my earlier point, Mike, is the sense that we're all being driven into, or almost being kettled into a universal apathy by the smart power, by the use of these NGOs to channel our natural humanitarian reflexes, are basically being contained within the prism that has been created by these globalist aligned NGOs and humanitarian organizations.
Yes, because we don't need to worry about it.
No, absolutely. We just click a button, or we get an app on our mobile phone which enables us to donate money, which will resolve the crisis in Syria. That's the prism that we need to break out of, prism and prison, because it's imprisoning our own self-empowerment. It's preventing us from actually taking the power back from this matrix that has been created to contain us, to contain our natural compassion, our natural humanity. So it's not only a war that is being waged against Syria or Yemen or Iraq or Ukraine, it's a war that is being genuinely waged against humanity. And that is the war that we should all be fighting. That is the war that we should all be participating in and rebelling against. Is being co-opted into this controlled society, which is controlling all opposition to itself within its own apparatus.
Yeah. Okay, and to end today's news then, just wanted to mention that the Child Abuse Inquiry, which is apparently investigating the extent to which institutions have failed to protect children from sexual abuse in England and Wales, has started its public hearings, and they're beginning with the child migration programs. So today, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse begins its first public hearings. These relate to the sexual abuse in the British child migration programs and the institutional failings of organisations based in England and Wales. The child migration programs are a case study, which is part of the inquiry's protection of children outside the United Kingdom investigation. So what are we talking about here? It's all the children that were sent to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand beginning, I guess, in the 40s until the mid-70s or so. And in 2010, they say the government issued an apology for its role in the child migration programs. The inquiry will hear from a number of former child migrants who've alleged that they suffered sexual abuse in relation to the migration in a range of institutions and contexts. The inquiry will also hear evidence from expert witnesses about the history and context of the child migration programs from the Child Migrants Trust. And Vanessa, all I want to say here is, of course, they're busy looking at this historic process which began in the 40s, ended in the 70s, and we have not learned any lessons. Child sexual abuse, child trafficking, child migration is happening today, and this inquiry is doing nothing to look into that. Children are being taken out of countries like Syria, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, and they're being trafficked. They're coming to Britain, into our care system in Britain. They're going straight out the other side of the care system and disappearing to goodness knows where. This child abuse inquiry is a travesty. It's not looking at any of that stuff. There may be lessons to be learned from what's happened historically, and for the people that were involved in it, then that maybe they get some closure out of this. But there is a problem happening now which isn't being dealt with. And it's about time. Well, this is another issue we should not be quiet about.
We shouldn't be quiet, full stop.
Okay. Thank you. And on that note, thank you, Vanessa. We will be back tomorrow at the usual time. I believe Brian will be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.